the market overall. Now, this is a head-on aerial from Google. This is the garage. The M represents the light rail station. It's a streetcar line, kind of neat, cool streetcars that goes like this up into the downtown. And it happens to be adjacent to the Southfields Village, which is the super regional mall on the south side of the city. 2 million square feet, and it's got all sorts of other development, power centers and whatever along it. But it's a pretty decent mall, higher influence. I don't know why the Abercrombie & Fitch thing popped up, but it did. There's an Apple store, there's a Macy's. Those are the kinds of retailers that are in here. So definitely is an upscale environment. So here, once again, we're looking at so interesting. So adjacent to the mall really is this site. So we're next to transit. I don't know if people would actually walk across the parking lot. I guess on a snowy day they wouldn't, but it's certainly close enough to do that. And it has the kind of shopping that I think would appeal to people. And it's not unpleasant, though, looking at a big parking lot. In fact, this is the site over here. Driving by it, there's the garage, the big building, and nothing but a big embankment, and frankly, a lot of lights, if you will.
Is
So,
there a train line of some sort nearby?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Light rail, like tracks on the other side.
So let's just go back there for a second, and we'll show you the map. So the light rail, this here is the end of the line, and there's a spur. Though there's other, you can take the train a little bit further, there's a split. So this is really where the depot is for all the cars, and it comes in here, and then right there is the station. So these people actually can park here, and within about 20 minutes, they're in downtown. Really quick, don't have to deal with traffic. You had a question?
I was just going to say, looking at the vistas from the site, you know, it doesn't lend itself to office or high rise, because no one wants to look at the end of the rail. But with multifamily, with the right landscaping, I mean, it really doesn't matter.
I think that's a really good observation. It matters, but it's how you design it and build it.
Matters, but
That's right. And so I wasn't part of the the Port Authority team that put out the request for proposal. And you say, well, what's the highest and best use where they can generate opportunities here? And what's interesting is you say, well, gee, would you put office here? Unlikely, because then you'd still have people driving to the office. It's unlikely that because the rail lines, which I'll show you in a minute, are CBD centric. People are going downtown for the job. They're generally not going from the downtown where there's not much housing in Pittsburgh out to the job. And if they are, generally the jobs are not on the rail. So housing makes better sense. Brandon?
Does sound have any effect from the train? Just going right by that?
yeah.
Okay, so the short answer is yes. And then let's think about South Florida for just a minute. All right, so my house has been just built within the last year. And it follows the Dade County 2010 code, even though it's up in Palm Beach. And it requires impact-resistant glass. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, I'm not worried unless the hurricane is over 175 miles an hour. But I must tell you, yes, I wear hearing aids, so I can't hear anything anyways. But when you go into the house, and I have actually the turnpike, which is about a half mile away. I've got Central Boulevard and PGA Boulevard. You cannot hear a thing. So the technology, the construction now is such that it really isn't as much of an issue as it was. And so if they build it right, and I don't remember the specs there, they'll probably, because look, it's Pittsburgh, it gets cold in the winter, they're going to need double pane, low E glass, I mean, all sorts of important construction things. I think the sound, frankly, won't be an issue at all.
Obviously, you were not the only one with the idea for a multifamily. Why did they think you?
Well, no, we were hired by the company that got the award to do the feasibility study for them. And so that's fine. I can put on my hat any which way. I can build it for myself and my investors, or I can advise and consult for others who need our expertise.
So are you taking a fee to develop this property, or?
So I don't remember the details, but yes, so in fact what happens is that the company that's building it, they in fact have a series of investors as well. They'll collect a fee a development fee. And we haven't gotten into the pro forma. So in that construction number that Dr. Forgy was talking about, often you'll put in lots of what I call soft costs. The hard cost is the building, the materials. The soft costs are the architects, engineers, consultants fee, and then there's usually a development fee for the developer. And it's 3, 4, 5% of the deal. So it is baked into that. So they'll earn the fee on the deal, and then there's usually a participation in the profits down the end. And so even if the developer doesn't own it, but if they do a lease deal, there's an opportunity. And they're sharing, in effect, that opportunity with the government in this particular case. So let's go past a couple of these pictures and actually get to this, which is kind of, it's a little hard to see, but it explains the issue so that we can look at the site. Because the site itself is right here. It's on this particular spur, and of the, I guess we'll call it the red and the orange, or excuse me, the orange and blue spur, and goes downtown. This was important. What was interesting is, well, great adjacency to transit and for driving, good school system in fact. So this is one of those cities and towns in Allegheny County, which is in Pennsylvania. There are 129 municipalities. Not quite as many school districts, but it's almost half that, our school district. And the Bethel Park and Upper St. Clair and Mount Lebanon communities have good schools. And you say, wait a second, does that have an impact on an apartment complex? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, it's not that everybody's single or couples, but there may be students and kids there as well, and families. And so, premier retail destination, if you can go next door and eat at Cheesecake Factory and do those kinds of things, that certainly is a draw as well. So what we did is we started looking at our data from REES. Now doesn't this table look familiar? So remember, this is a similar table to the one that Vishal showed us for Charlotte, and we looked at the Upper St. Clair submarket and related that to the entire Pittsburgh market, if you will. And we looked at the history for development, if you will, what was built, what was absorbed, so that's basically the inventory that was absorbed, and then said, gee, over time, what's going on in this? So the dates are wrong, actually. It just simply means that it's over a 12-month period in each case, and then you look at the annualized history, and you can see that the Upper St. Clair market, very small for any new construction. Very little of it was basically slated for delivery. We did that same analysis for under construction, planned, and proposed, and looked at the chart that was in the REES information. And so we calculated that if this was under construction, we looked at the total market, less than 1% of the inventory. So that already tells you something right there. What does it tell you? One guess. You can't be too far wrong.
High demand.
Okay, so it's interesting. So this is the supply side. You're saying high demand, you can infer, but you say, wait, if there's high demand, you think somebody would be building, right? So you're close. Any other guesses?
No competition.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
No competition.
No real competition. This is really important, even more importantly than demand in this case. Look at the demand side. And so if there's no new competition, we can build a product and probably be out of the box in a very good way. And so, you know, it just tells you a little bit, just once again, looking at those numbers. Yes?
I'm looking here and I'm seeing 34 units, 86 units absorbed, but no units built. Did you mean that was carrying inventory that was absorbed?
Yeah, it was, in fact, so nothing's been built in the last 5 years, and finally the projects that were built before then got absorbed up, and it was like, there's nothing left to absorb, frankly. Very little inventory. Once again, it was looking just at the pipeline of development. So that's the first thing. So then we said, let's look at the economy. Pittsburgh actually went through the bubble very well because it's diversified. It's not all about steel mills. It's about medicine. It's about healthcare. It's about technology. I mean, there's a big Google campus there, 400,000 square feet in the east end of the city. There's PNC Corporation, which is, and Mellon Bank, and they are huge in financial services. So the city really has radically transformed itself from a steel town, if you will, into something that was very viable and able to recover from the disaster of 2008. It's an affordable place to live. It's cheap. By our comparison, of course, incomes aren't necessarily high there either. But the key is, if it's affordable, then it's desirable, and it becomes something that becomes a magnet. Total population, by the way, of Pittsburgh is dropping, the metropolitan area. But just because an MSA has flat or little population growth doesn't mean there aren't opportunities. What is happening is, if you look at the cohorts or the individual segments within that, so younger population is going up, older population is dying off. So it's interesting, the matrix and the mix of the population is adjusted. And the economy basically said, oh my goodness, jobs grew. This is substantial. When jobs grow more than 1.7 or 1%, that's important. And the gross domestic product increased in every year except for one.
What's
That's
MSA
very
again?
positive. Pardon?
What's MSA again?
MSA is Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Okay.
And I'll give you 3 or 4 slides on that. Anybody else heard that term before, MSAs? We're in an MSA right now. It's the Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach MSA. And there, anybody know how many people live in
I think it was 2 million.
How many?
I think it was 2 million.
6 or 8, right?
6 plus
For our MSA?
for this MSA.
Tri-county area.
The Tri-County area. It's a lot of folks. So job growth has continued. 50,000 jobs were added in 4 years. Downtown, 10,000 new employees growing. New 800,000 square foot headquarters. And by the way, why is that important? Simply because we're right on the trail, on the rail line, excuse me. And if someone says, I don't want to live downtown, I want to live out in the burbs, and then I can just get into town in 20 minutes. You don't even have to drive. You don't worry about the snow or any of the other weather. That's important. And what's really interesting, so there are, in Pittsburgh, 130,000 people work downtown. And for those of you in the Pittsburgh, and I actually lived 9 years of my life there, so I know the city well, and that's why they put me on the job, no doubt. It's just that it's a compact, walkable city. And it's like San Francisco, and you may laugh, but the truth is, it's a hilly, compact city, and it works in many urban ways, which is why somehow it's been able to survive over it. Now, the universities and medical centers are in the East End, so it's unlikely that people who would live here would be in that particular cohort. But we went to Reese again. We said, remember that chart we had for Charlotte? Here's our chart for Pittsburgh. Looking at the asking rents, and this is just general. Of course, we're going to break it down into various types of units. You can see the asking rents in the past and projection, steady growth except for 2009. The effective rents continue to go up. That's a positive story. Something that certainly would warrant the opportunity for investment, right, folks? And then we look at the trends. And we look, the dark line is our submarket. No studios, really. 1 bedrooms, 2s and 3s. And it's interesting, when we look at this, the asking rents were about even with most of the rest of the market, which is fine. It's not underpriced, not overpriced either. And then we look at the mix. So this tells us, what does this tell us right here with this chart? I'm sorry, speak up. Well, the 2 bedrooms are more, that's right, and the 1s, there are hardly any 3s. So my guess is we're going to have 1, 2, and maybe 2.5 person households here, but having a young child, if you will. And you can see the unit sizes, of course, they get larger, if you will, from there. And what's interesting is that the unit sizes in the submarket are smaller than the unit sizes in the rest. But the prices are higher, which is interesting. So what does that say?
Better quality construction?
Maybe, but but you would think. So one thing you can't always see in this kind of data is the actual price and the price per square foot. And it's basically saying if the units are smaller, the pricing is equal to or better, it means that it's desirable as a community, because we don't know what property they're in just yet. So here's that chart, which is really interesting, certainly to me. So the red line is vacancy rate. No surprise, I hope, to everybody, the vacancy went up in 2009. All right, the dark line is construction. You see any dark bars here? No. Starting in 2015, the pipeline, So nothing was built. Absorption. Once again, no surprise. People left here, employment was down. So do you see any correlations? What's going on here? Look at that red line. Tell me the story that we read. I'm sorry, speak up so everybody else can hear it too. Well, so it's interesting. So Frederick, you're talking about equilibrium. So not really. Don't let this line fool you, because vacancy rate here is measured over here. So we're looking at vacancy rates projected at 2% here. They were above 6% there. Anybody else see what's going on in the market? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just a overall lesson as far as taking advantage of opportunities, but with a high vacancy rate and a low absorption rate, if a person was to acquire things in as the vacancy rate lowers.
So what?
Demand over supply.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what's
Supply
really
and
happened?
demand is going
So-
back.
Yes, Paul.
Well, the way I see it, my eyes are bad, but the vacancy rate's declining. Looks like development is increasing in construction.
All right, so remember, this is a projection. I did this study in 2013, so this is the projection. It's that same data, the baseline data, the Y-B that we saw before. Yes, so look, vacancy has gone down. There was a real uptick in absorption right after the bubble. And then you look at these numbers, you say, gee, it's kind of zero. And why is that? Because there is no new product. All right, and that's why vacancy is about here. And then so finally, this is why we see that pipeline of 350 units under construction, 1,200 overall plan, which will be absorbed. But even with this new construction, the demand is forcing the vacancy rate, what we think will be down. That's a positive news story, of course. So that's really good. We couldn't see this in many markets, especially not in 2013. And then, of course, we looked at the line as we wrote for all of this, and looking at the stock and housing, and looking at the effective rents as well. A positive news story, a lot of numbers right up on there. And so we said, you know what? From the supply side, the numbers make sense. Now what about the other part of the supply, which is your comps? So we looked at 20 different properties. Location, pricing, construction, amenities. And I looked at 3 different groups of properties. So instead of saying A, B, C here in this marketplace, recent construction, I couldn't say new construction because nothing really had been built. Older high-rises, which is this kind of a property or product type in its own right, think garden style. Garden is, I think, a euphemistic word here. It wasn't really a garden, but lower products that were 1 or 2 stories. And then we compared it throughout the larger MSA, and then we went through all the types. And remember, all these items are in the REE category, right? And then we took the information, and then I went on to apartment search for rent.com. I compiled the figures, and we figured, okay, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What's the sizing? What's the rent? And we literally went through it. So for the newer product, this is a Lincoln Properties deal. They always call it Properties Lincoln something. It's a big property company here. 338 units, how many acres, developed in 1993. We'll call this the gold standard, nearby. Similarly, on this property as well, another company did it. So this is typical of suburban, kind of upscale apartments in the Northeast and the Midwest. Kind of wood frame construction, parking may or may not be in a garage or in a field adjacent to it. And we just kept looking at the numbers. So we literally were cranking this out, another newer property, and then we go into the older property. A lot of buildings were built like this in the 60s and 70s, mid-rise and high-rise buildings. And though the numbers themselves aren't that important, the rents are lower here, older property, A versus B and C. And then we went to the garden apartments. That was my euphemism for this stuff from the 1950s and 60s, which is stuff. Some of it was renovated, some of it was not. And then we did a comparable leap. We went to the east end of the city, which is where all the technology jobs and the universities are. Because we said, if we're going to build new product, we're going to make very sure that we don't have a bleed of our competition to there. Because in the east end, high walk scores, it's a very desirable place to live. But, so we look at these. This is right next to the University of Pittsburgh. Well managed, well built, outside of downtown. Great, and then we compared all of the properties. What's interesting about this table? Without even looking at a number, just visually, what are we looking at?
Missing a lot of data.
I'm sorry, speak up.
Sorry, missing a lot of data.
Well, no, we're not missing any data. So you're closer, you got the idea, but the wrong conclusion about what the visual tells you. What's the visual show you?
One bedroom, two
That
bedroom.
they're all ones and twos.
Yeah, thank you, that's all. It wasn't a trick question, if you will. But once again, very few studios in the marketplace. Now, we don't know if that's a demand or supply issue. And, a few more 3 bedrooms. But it certainly tells you about the nature of the marketplace. So it really isn't that hard to look at that. It helps us figure out what's going on with demand. So now, let's actually go to demand. And how do we figure out demand? We look at the market. This dark blob is Allegheny County. So of the counties, the way they define the markets here is by county. I did a broad brush, not the sub-markets, because we felt that for a new product like this, we actually had a broader market competition, if you will. So define primary and secondary markets. And the numbers are harder to see than I thought here. And so when you define your markets, you can actually begin to look at who lives in the market. Remember I mentioned how we look at income and jobs? So we're defining that. We're saying how many households in a particular market. And so let's just look at Allegheny County. We're going to do a broad market here. There are 257,000 households. Approximately 600,000 or 700,000 people, I guess, in the marketplace. Then we looked at how many of them are renter households. Because I don't care about people who own their homes right now. Though some people may move from that, the cohort we're looking for are people who are already in the rental market. So a little bit more than a third of them, so the estimated number of rental households, 96,000 households. Now this is standard multifamily analysis, if you will. Kind of a template, very similar to what was going on here, if you will. That's the financial back of the envelope. This is more than the back of the envelope, but it gives you the key steps. And so we know how many renter households, but they're not all going to be the ones who are going to rent, right? A lot of them are very happy where they live. And so the question next was, what is what we call the mobility rate? So in any market, when you look at the potential demand, you want to know what people's propensity is to move. And in this market, it's really high, 25%. It depends on every market. You can find the statistics. Here we said 25% of those individuals may be likely to move in any given year. So we're doing simple math now. I don't need a calculator for this either. About 96,000 households, 25% are moving. Then what's the rent per household mobility? About 24,000 households. Now we have to add something else. Is the city growing? I said no, there's really no population growth. Barely a blip. A couple hundred households, that's it. Still, so we've got about 24,000 households. And the key is, how many of those households can we get who are moving in a year on a new project like this? So capture rates are important. Once again, also, it depends on your understanding of the market rate. But capture rates for multifamily housing, if you're in the 1% to 2% range, that's probably a good expectation in any market. So we're saying, well, wait a second, if we can capture 1.5% of the market, how many units do we need to deliver? Or what can be absorbed? Are you all with me?
Yes.
Okay, so it's interesting. So if my capture rate is about 30 units a month, remember we've got about 320 units, can I absorb all of the units in 1 year? It means I have to have a capture rate of 1.5% of the market. That's kind of at the higher end of the market. Remember I said I don't really 1% to 2%, but if you're pushing a capture rate that says you've got to capture 2, 3, 4, 5% or more of the market, that's tough. You understand why? I mean, you've got competition out there, and others, properties will react. They'll either offer free rent or they'll change it, anything to compete. So then we said, well, wait, what happens if we say 20 units a month, and all of a sudden we're at about 1%. And you keep going down and look at this, well, I'm not sure we want to take 3 years to absorb property, 120 units a year. But so here you are at about 1%, give or take. We probably could absorb the property in about 18 months. that's okay. In really robust markets, you probably want to do it in a lot less. In San Francisco, where we're doing our deal, we expect that and we only have 85 units that we're going to build there. They'll be gone in 2 months. Did I see a question, I thought, or no? Great.
I would like to know where the mobility rate comes from.
That's a great question. And the mobility rate depends on every market. So what, at the Weitzman Group, we had a number of economists who were helping us figure this out, just like the folks at REE have Moody's.com. And so Tom Justin, who is an economist, basically was saying, okay, I'm looking at a number of employment factors, I'm looking at turnover in households, I'm looking at all sorts of other data. And he does his calculation and says that. Now, so in a way, that's kind of the witch's brew. You have to put the right number in there. But generally, in each metropolitan area, there's an accepted number. And you basically pick up the phone and talk to your contacts, if you will, and get a real feel for that. So I wish I could give you a better answer than that, but as I said, great, Tom, thank you for the help to figure it out. Yes?
For projects, assumptions like those, we put something and then document the support for our assumption to see what makes it up.
Yeah, you got to document it, that's correct. You say, so where do they come from? So in this particular case, for example, that 25% mobility rate, you know, my footnote would say, okay, discussed with Tom Justin, economist at the Weitzman Group, you know, extensive knowledge of the market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And so one thing that's really helpful when you do your study, and I'm hoping you can, not everybody can do it, but I'm basically going to say the data that you do collect, the information that you're going to deal with, then I want you to find somebody in the marketplace and pick up the phone. So either the expert, the broker, and say, okay, by the way, some of them would say, happy to help you. I know you're a student at Nova in the real estate program, can help me understand this. Some brokers will say nothing, hang up the phone, and then you dial somebody else. Or you'll call, you know, the local development authority, or the Broward Chamber, or someone else who might have access to that. And then you can correlate that to the stuff that you get off of Greece. So we're continuing to take those numbers. And remember, we looked at this total number here, we looked at the secondary market. I didn't think it was relevant, but we wanted to make sure that our lenders had the data, if you will. And from here, what we could do, I think I'm just repeating the charts because they were bigger, it was harder to see that. Once again, we had that. So from that, we could also do a little bit of calculating. Well, we know how many households are out there, we knew which income bands they were in, and then we figured out what's their ability to afford the rent. And so we looked at the rents and said, okay, here are the rents that are in the marketplace, and we're going to do our allocation of units, give or take here, based upon that pie chart, because that was a good indication of what the allocation was in this particular marketplace. But before we did that, we said, how did we slice our project? Remember that same table we had before? We then inserted our recommendation. You know, transit access, when is it built? And we said, you know, we think that these numbers really were in the midpoint, are comfortable. So it's always great to be able to introduce a new project below the peak pricing, but a better product at the same time. And the last part of the analysis basically said, wait, can people afford this? Now, there are a lot of numbers behind this. I'm giving you summary charts, trying to give you a feel for what it is that's being done. And so when we took those rents, we then said, okay, remember, we know how many households there are in each category, and can they afford it? So the one bedroom, if they did the rent that we're recommending, required annual household income would be $52,000, because they'd have a housing payment of about $15,600. So we're using about a 28 or 30% ratio of your housing cost to your total income. That's kind of a standard number that you see out here. And we went along the band. And so we looked at those numbers and said, well, do these households exist? And they do. And so we felt comfortable that the rents, not only could we do the rents because the households could support it, we could do the unit mix because the competition showed that it was missing, or we could put it into the marketplace. And then further, deeper analysis, and here there's just a lot of information about, oh gee, what kind of flooring, what kind of plumbing fixtures. In fact, we looked at every other project and said, what's the level of finish in those projects? And I did not want our client to spend too much money. I wanted to spend just enough to be above everybody else. You don't have to shoot for the moon in this case.
This is pretty broad, but on the inward mobility or local, people moving.
Internal mobility.
Internal mobility. What's the newness factor or being at that, not too much, but just enough? Because in a market like that, there's not many people moving in, but there are people moving.
All right,
And so if you put a new place in with, that looks like Home Gardens magazine and everything's nice and new, do you calculate that into your capitalization?
So first things, let's simplify it. If you're better than the other product in the marketplace, then that's an attraction. And if you can price within that price range, then you have a draw. Many places here in South Florida, for example, they say, oh, I'm going for gold, I'm going to go for luxury, and they're pricing at the top end of the market. This market is wealthy enough to support it. We said, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
First of all, this is not it's next to a rail yard. It's next to a huge parking lot and a garage, and while we could deal with the environment, we could do the sound, it wasn't, a luxury development. It's just a nice opportunity. So I didn't think there'd be any impact. I mean, you couldn't say, gee, can we draw more than our regular share? Because then we would have said, hey, can our capture rate be higher? If we felt there was no competition, I would have said, I could push the capture rate numbers up. And if I could push the capture up, then much to, and I'm forgetting who said it. Was it you, Carol, about, this goes way back to a comment that you made. And that was, gee, if you're at full occupancy, however you define it, gee, are you priced right? Because you want to make sure you push the envelope. And here we felt you could not push that envelope because it just wasn't that wealthy a market. Right? So we came up with a variety of recommendations. We said, look, the absorption, there's a lot of depth in the market. There's demand in the primary market, and that area alone would support the absorption, even if we had no capture of anybody in the secondary markets. And we actually felt that, for the first 80% of the deal, we could do 30 units per month. And we probably could get this done in about 12 to 15 months. And even better, we thought we could pre-lease. And it all depends on the timing you enter the market. When do you think the worst time to open a property is in Pittsburgh?
Winter.
Smack in the middle of winter. That's right. So, that's like saying, when's the worst time to open up a property here?
Hurricane season.
I'm sorry, when? No,
Summer hurricane season.
yeah, that's right. So you have to be attuned to all that's going on. So less than 18 months for a property to stabilize is a really, really good
Why do they only
summary.
pre-lease 25% of it? Why don't you just try to lease up as much as you can?
Well, that's really interesting. All right, who wants to give me an answer to Brandon's question?
Why are they only pre-leasing 25% and not just leasing as much as they can before it opens?
They might be able to change the rate.
There you go. I mean, you don't want to turn off your market opportunity. And so, in fact, think about when you look at the condos that are released here, they only do a limited release. You're in effect testing the market as well.
So you wouldn't try to put a high rent price to pre-lease just to see who came in and did it?
So each market's different. So here in South Florida, we've got an international contingent, the Venezuelans, the Brazilians, and others. They need to put their money in a safe place. Sure, I'd push it on the numbers. But that's not the kind of market that was in Pittsburgh. It's a working market, not working class, but a working professional market. And you have to be careful about where you slot yourself. And you see, we didn't put our rent at the high end. We put it in the kind of the top third. And so the property is now starting construction. In fact, I'm going to show you a news article that just was on the screen a few months ago. That in fact, I think they're going to do it right, and if they pre-lease just enough and they're successful, then you can push the rent to make more money. In fact, let's go off that. There's a here we go. So it's kind of real interesting. I mean, this is the plan that was finally approved by the Port Authority. They finished the negotiation, took on a couple of years. That's just the way it goes. But the sketch, same sketch, and okay, they've got a couple of different buildings, they've landscaped it, they're nesting the resident parking within there. So they have parking, if you will, it's interesting, surrounding the site at grade. That's cheaper. And in this particular case, they're only dedicating 84 spaces. I think they'll end up finding that they probably need more. But the irony is, of course, you're right next to the train station. The number of spaces per unit is less than what you normally would need to build on this particular property. So the sketch that we had ends up being very much like the deal that we see here. And you know, if you read through the article about the complex, what about the rents? And gee, rents would range from about $1,200 a month to $2,400 a month. You know, those were right in the middle of the range that we talked about. So it was a good feasibility study, and it gave them the ammunition to go to make the deal with the Port Authority. Any questions? That's the end of that particular discussion. Okay. I think I'm going to call it a day, because it's been a long day. We're in this room together. And we got the requisite time, which I think is good, and we'll just have more opportunities.
Sorry, can you talk about the midterm?
Sure.
Yeah, what are we doing?
Is that the next class?
So, the object of the midterm is really to test you on what you're reading, what you're absorbing in these presentations. I don't have it written yet, so I can't tell you what the content is. And so it's will be an exam. Well, I haven't decided whether it's open book or closed book just yet.
Like multiple choice or like a lot of?
No, I don't believe in multiple choice. So that's like, you know, you have a 25% chance of getting it right if you get 4 answers there. No, I believe in fill in the blank, the essay, and a few exercises. So the whole point of an exam is not to test you to see what I can get as your grade. It really is a little bit different. It's to see what you're learning, so it helps me in turn to say, oh gee, you do understand this concept, or you don't get this concept, and I can circle back, frankly. Of course, I'm getting you a grade, but it gives me a real feel for whether or not you're absorbing the material on it. Yes? Yeah, so, you know, we have 4 weeks, you know?
So will you send us like
Yes,
an
Rebecca?
outline of like the topics that will be covered?
No outline for topics. But look, you have a reading assignment already, you know.
So it'll be like on the reading section.
So, and that's in the next couple of chapters as well.
2 weeks.
That's right. And so next week we will go on a field trip, if you will. So it's going to change things. And I've decided, you know, as I said, it's been a long day. I do want you to all present your developer stories, but not today. I think that we'll defer that to a later time.
So that's sorry, I just want to make sure so that's beyond all the chapters that we're reading just now and then the next reading as well.
For the reading that's due next week,
Right.
2 weeks from now as
Okay.
well. And anything else that I feel like I need to push your way as well. Wait, none of you are taking any other courses right now, right?
Yes. Yes.
Why? What's the other course?
The law course.
Doesn't
The
count.
land.
Yeah.
To speak for a minute, it feels like we went over a lot today, and like boom, 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 boom. And this is, you know, all important information, and I'm here to learn and know thoroughly.
Sure.
So can you speak for a minute, one, how you're going to build on this class, but then if you know, kind of the whole program?
Yes, so,
These are fundamental things.
so remember, what we're trying to do here is give you a solid grounding. And the way we're doing it is by exposing you to concepts and ideas, number one, to tools that you can use, not just here in class, but ultimately in your professional career as well. And I guess there should be a third one there, but I can't figure it right now. And so just having that exposure to these different levels of concepts and ideas, our focus is to give you the toolkit ultimately that allows you to do better in the financial course, to understand development strategies, and touch upon it for each one. And all we did today really was say, here's the way to at least do the back of the envelope. Here's the way to understand how to gather information on tools. In fact, I will do one other tool thing. So you can't close your computers. In fact, I want everybody to open their computers. I want to do one other thing for about 10 minutes, if you don't mind. You have a question?
No, I was just going to say, as a person that's been in this program for a while, you will see this stuff again over and you'll be required to do things with case studies and things like that. And so you'll put it to use. The things like what he sent us, the Excel file, the stuff that we're going over material, all that stuff will be reused in other courses. And the way it works is you just keep using it in different courses. And kind of
That's right. Practice makes perfect. If you make it to the next semester, and I'm sure you will, and you take development part 2, which I may or may not be teaching, maybe, then we'll get into case studies, and we'll present the case studies, and you'll take these very tools and say, all right, how do I figure out the answer? How does that work? Why is it working like that? So I realize there's a lot of information. That's why I decided I'd just simply give you an example of this case study, because at some point, whether it's not this semester, probably next semester, you will figure out the answers to the case study as to why that is the way it is. So let's just open. I hope everybody, almost everybody has a computer here. And I do want to do one other thing, and that is, I can find it here. Here we go. So I would like to talk about real capital analytics for a few more minutes. So real capital analytics is another provider of information and data. They're just everywhere, aren't they? And so let me just blow that up on the screen nicely. And so we know it as RCA. So can you all go to rcanalytics.com? Hopefully you're online. Because I want to actually, I want to register you for your academic subscriptions. And if you don't have your computer, I'll send the link, and you figure out how to do it, but it's really great. So real capital analytics is comparable to CoStar. It's all about transactions. Now, as your academic subscription, you won't get the detail of the actual transaction, but you'll get the information that they provide, not only in the news, but some really good products, and that is trends. It talks about cap rates and all those other items that you've been asking questions about. Gee, how do we figure it out? We look at the market. We look at what's going on in the various product types, if you will. All right, so does everybody see Real Capital Analytics or rcanalytics.com? Great. And so let's do something. Up here at About Us, go down to Academic Program. And I want you to fill it out. Let's just do it now while we can. I think you may be able to do it. If you can't do it on your iPhone or whatever, you're doing it from there. But this way, at least I'm ensuring that most of you get there pretty quickly. And I already have lots of different accounts. So I think your position is student, okay? And really, put in your first and last name, and of course you've got to do the nova.edu address. That's the key. And fill in, put your phone in, they want your information, but they're not going to do anything with it. This is good. University, of course, just put Nova Southeastern, school and department. I guess you can put Azanga Business School, or you can put MSRED, whatever you wish.
Where did you find the academic area? The assignment?
About us.
So if you
About
go
Us,
to
okay.
About Us, sorry about that, I was a little too quick. You see that About Us, the drop-down menu? The next to last item is the
Gotcha.
academic
Okay.
program. Okay? Great. So this is going to give you trend reports, which are really useful. And just my suggestion, just put the end date at like 12/31/15, because they want to know when your semester ends. And your title, student. And fill in your other person. So on mine, there's a trick question on this. On mine says how many letters are in RCA. So everybody has a little bit of a different question there because they want to make sure you're not a robot. That's all. And then you'll submit, and while you're doing that, I'm going to log in. So they will be sending to you probably within a minute or two a password, which is just a series of letters and digits. You'll click on the link. And what you'll be able to see is this. So this is summarized information, which is really, really great. I'm just focused on the United States. If you want to go looking at Europe and the rest of the world, that's fine. But here we have PDFs and Excel files for all the different product types. You can imagine big pic means just the big picture. But if you look at office and other items here, you can look at these trends and these particular reports. I'm going to jump down to apartment. It's going to download that report for me. And so this is their most recent review, apartment report. Talks about garden, high-rise, apartment, transaction volume, and it's going to give you a really good feel for the marketplace. It will tell you what the cap rates are and momentum, the movement in the marketplace too as well. And this is a really interesting chart, and you can actually see which metro areas are where on this spectrum. When we say spectrum, okay, so what kind of volume change in transaction, what kind of pricing change here as well. So you can see Philly and Baltimore, nothing much is happening here. But look at New York, other areas, so certainly the volume has increased. Way out here, Miami, look at this. Volume has increased over 150%, and pricing has increased 25%. On a unit per unit basis, if you will. That's an indication of the market. And then they give you a summary. And you can look at various cities too as well. They have Miami, they have Palm Beach, funny, and they have Broward separately. So in effect, it's Coffee County, McKinney, Dieter. So you can dig a little bit deeper without having to pay, so to speak, for it. And all this is in all the different product sectors as well. And then they'll give you selected, highlighted transactions. That tells you about movement in the marketplace. They're telling you about deals that are interesting and recent, and then they define what's going on as a result as well. So it's a great resource. One thing, of course, that I use it for, this is my academic account, but when I use it for my private account, we can go right through all these trends and trades, and I can drill right down to any radius and figure out transactions, and I download the Excel spreadsheet, and I can really fine-tune the kind of questions that you were asking about, what's going on with trends, occupancy, mobility, and things like that. So the good news is there's good broad data. You can't get all the transaction data, which leads me to one other item, and that's back to REES. So we have an account here which we purchased, and the account is a limited account. So I know a lot of you were looking at information, or some of you were, but I ask that you don't generate any reports right now, because every time you generate a report, it's like a ding or ka-ching for right now. So I'm happy to have you cruise through just to see how it works, and maybe next time we'll see, once we've figured out, well, what are we going to do for our major study project, then you can begin to really use the tool and do it effectively. And remember, this is an academic tool. I'm asking that you don't use it for your personal investment or business. It's not allowed. In fact, the contract that we signed with REES, if they see that you're digging things and they put two and two together, they'll go, okay, well you can pay us the $1,000 a month for subscribing to the service, and by the way, it's an annual contract, so pony up that 12 or 15 grand right now. So it's very valuable, it's good, but we have to be smart about how we use it, and I want you to all use it right and well. Yes?
The lifetime subscription ends when we finish the program, or only for certain classes?
So what we did for REES, we did it with the program, because my class ends on the 10th of October, but we want you to be able to use it in Dr. Forgey's next class, if you will. We just didn't want to separate and segment all that. So it'll get you through each semester, if you will. Yes?
You said you're posting that PowerPoint we went over today. It's going to be on Blackboard.
I will post Michelle's PowerPoint. I'll post this PowerPoint. I won't post the actual South Hills market study though, because that's still proprietary information. You know, if the deal was 10 years ago, maybe it would have. But I just wanted to see something, and it's real in the marketplace. Yes?
Yeah, in the syllabus, there are a bunch of manuals for different sectors of the real estate industry, and they seem pretty expensive. I want to
Yeah,
know,
they're not required.
Okay.
And once again, I wanted you to know what was out there. And I think most of them are in the library here. Now, one thing I want to make sure that you do remember is, and I thought some of you actually have the hard copy for emerging trends. Go to ULI, to the website. You're now all members, right?
I think he's working on it.
Yeah,
He's
I know
working
you
on it.
I got an email about
Wait,
it.
I thought you'd be there by now.
No, he just collected the data this week.
Okay, so the reason why I mention it is because there's a great, let me just show you this too, if I may. I think this is valuable. Let's see. So here's the ULI website. So, the ULI website, once you've gotten your membership, has a really great section called Case Studies. And these case studies are just about anything and everything. It's a great learning tool, and there's some that, as I said, if you get to the next, course there, we'll use some of them for our work. But I'm pointing it out to you because you can look at case studies, you can click on the View Recent Case Studies, and it will talk about different properties, different subjects, and it's also another great resource. So until we guide you, I don't know if you're going to be working on a retail deal or an office deal or an apartment deal, this is another resource that you can use to help look through some of the information. And the last thing I want to ask, did they take your names yet for CoStar? Is that in process? Because no, not yet. Okay, fine. Trying to.
And just so everybody knows, it took me 6 months to get on.
Yeah, you know, CoStar is like, we'll do it when you want to. And you're right. And that's why we push you to REES. That's probably going to be your main source of information and data here in the area.
But you'll have it for your capstone project, which is the most important time.
When is that?
That'll be your last.
Yeah. Gee, I thought this was your most important course because it formed your foundation for everything else that you do.
Would it be correct to label the strategy class as the capstone course? Or
Excuse me, folks, just a second. Yes, Jeff?
would it be correct to say that the strategy class, which is next mini semester, is the capstone course?
No, because capstone is different. Strategy course teaches you, in effect, the next kind of way to deal with these tools. There is a capstone course, which really will be a project whereby you are doing the full-fledged effort to figure out how to do it at all.
What's the class called? Or
I don't know.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't remember right.
It's the epitome, probably.
what's the
last
class
one.
called that you
The
said?
the capstone is it's part of the land development, or no? What is it? Yeah, but yeah.
Oh, it's part of the land use development
That's
course.
right.
Land use
Land
development.
We did 2 big projects. I think I got to change it out. We basically present to now, and everyone was in a panel discussion. It was pretty intense. It was a whole semester thing.
Okay.
It was a very big project. We're also brand new to the program, so it was kind of
And
different for us.
with both the NAOP is a association,
Just like,
developer association, so it's external to the school.
Yeah, I will give you some more resources when we meet next. And great. Do you have any extra calculators? You want to bring it back, or you can keep it for the semester? Yeah, you should. And you know, it's worth about $8 or $10, so if you lose it.
Well, one down.
Yeah.
You made it.
Hey, everything comes up to the next reading, right? Like, not just 1 and 4, but... Yeah, what's the next reading on it?
2 and 5.
So it's 1, 2, 4, and 5 on the text.
Yeah, did you get this sheet?
It's on the deal.
Beliefs, I haven't had time to read it. Yeah, I know. It's like they bombarded me. There's a lot of stuff.
Okay, it looks familiar though.
It's on here.
It's on there, what we're gonna do in each class.
Yeah. Your assignments. These are 2 people. It sounds like it's gonna be over. Oh, you do?
I think it's gonna be over, so as long as you read it and understand it, you should be all right.
He initially said, I don't, were you at the orientation? Yeah. Were you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Initially, I remember saying, yeah. Well, I remember saying in orientations that I don't teach the book, the book's deeper too. But however, if you did read the book,
This made sense to me.
yeah.
You didn't read the book.
Yeah,
You
this
knew.
is
This
all.
probably didn't make sense.
This is all covered.
Because they were all over the place.
But they come.
Did you read chapter 1 and 4? Did you read chapter 4? Okay, so this made sense.
Yeah.
You saw the flow going.
Sure.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is right. What's right on chapter 4.
A lot of it. They kind of looked at
But I mean, that's what, there's a lot of, there's a lot of information.
That was a long time.
I didn't even get to
It was cheap times, yeah.
Is there a good place? Yeah. You guys want to go get a beer? That was Brad. College.
He's running back.
It's been 15 years.
It's been 20.
I know, you were
23 for me.
Yeah, there's got to be some pre.
Hey, with football season, they got like dollar beers at Flight Deck. Well, when football starts. Flight Deck is our newest venue here. It's like an outdoor restaurant.
Oh, really? Yeah, where's that at?
It's the UC. We're used to it.
I don't know where anything is. I drove around campus last night. I was like, it's been like 15 years.
That's the one that the Unisys guy. What is his name? Winky or something? The one that worked on the
He said he had been doing one.
You know what?
Danny or something like that.
Unisource, the company? I don't know what that is. They're like a cleaning supply. I don't know.
Oh my god, I was like, do you have a problem with someone everything? I will show you next time.
Oh, someone dropped the...
I don't know, I honestly.
We talked that way.
Yeah, I was going to, there's like a comment farmer.